Hi, I'm Ken Ross. Have you ever wanted to have a little bit more engagement on your team's video calls? Well, one of the things that you can do is introduce something called a lower thirds, something like this, which gives you a little bit more information up front. People meeting with you can see your name, location, maybe your title, local time zone, anything you want to put down there. You can be as creative as you like. It's easy to do using some free software. Let's dive in and see how it's done. All right, so the first thing we're going to need is some free software called OBS, which is the Open Broadcaster System. The software is available for free, downloadable from their website, which is the obsproject.com. It works for Windows, works for Mac, works for Linux. We're going to be doing our demo here on Windows, so if that's you, fantastic. If it's Mac, it's going to be very, very similar. There might be some slight differences here and there, but overall, it's going to be pretty much the same thing. To create this nameplate, which is usually called a lower thirds, we're going to use just the default settings inside of OBS. Although there's many different plugins that are available to enhance what OBS can do, we're just going to use the built-in features. You'll be able to do this really on just about any laptop or desktop system that you have. It won't take up many resources. And although you can get as fancy as you want with overlaid videos and all kinds of interesting effects, we're going to keep it simple today. If there's some additional effects or different ideas that you have that you think you might want some help with trying to do with OBS and creating this virtual camera, let me know in the comments below, and we'll see if we can't figure that out together. Now, I mentioned virtual camera, and that's really how this all works. OBS has the ability to create a virtual camera, and what that means is that inside of Teams, or really any conferencing software, when you go to select the camera that you're going to use for the video conference, what you're going to select, instead of whatever your webcam might be, is the OBS virtual camera. I'll show you how to set up the virtual camera inside of Teams once we're all done. So let's take a quick tour around OBS just to get you familiar with the pieces that we're going to be using and what some of the things are called. To start with, we have in the bottom left corner, and let me zoom in a bit so we can see this easier, we have something called scenes. Scenes are, you can think of those for our purposes as a way of creating different stages, different cameras even. They're different views that you can present as your virtual camera. So what that means is that you could have multiple views, multiple scenes, and be able to switch between which scene you're showing. What's cool about this is that you could have a different camera that's configured for different roles that you might be in, or even different customers that you might work with. And that makes it a lot more customizable and a lot more engaging. Next to scenes, we have sources. So for any scene that you have, that scene contains sources. What the sources are the things that make up the scene. So for example, those might be graphics or video clips. That could include audio. It could include web pages, and a few built-in things like color swatches or a few other visual elements. You can see in my scenes I have something called camera, and I have two sources for that camera. One is my microphone, which is this main microphone here, and the other is the camera that I'm using for my video. I put those both as sources for my camera scene. And one of the things that you can do inside of the scenes that you create is you can also include other scenes. So what this lets me do then is set up my camera how I want, and then in every other scene where I might want my camera to appear, I can just reference that initial camera, that initial scene. And then any settings that I might have will be used consistently. All right, next to that we have an audio mixer. You don't need to pay really any attention to that. For what we're doing, you're not going to be pulling in audio and special effects and things like that, although OBS certainly is capable of it. If you were working with audio, then the audio mixer gives you a way of controlling those things. And as you can see here, I have audio coming in from my microphone, which is the main audio that we see. And you can even see that there's audio coming in from the camera itself, because the camera has its own microphone, but it's disabled, so we don't have to listen to it. So let's get started. First thing you have to do is create a scene. So we click on the plus sign down here to add a scene. We click on the minus to delete a scene, and we can click on the up and down arrows to rearrange them if we need to. So we're going to click on plus. We're going to create a new scene. I'm going to just call this Fancy Cam and hit OK. And so now we have a camera in our new scene, and it's of course the same camera. Any changes I made to that camera scene would be reflected in any of the scenes that we use it. So a couple of things with these sources. You'll notice that there's a red border and little grab handles, so that I can use those to resize things if I want to and move things around. I can just click on my mouse and drag, and I can move the camera around. I could resize it and put it anywhere that I want in the scene. And again, if I go back to my original camera scene, see, it's not affected this. It's only affecting that camera as it appears in this scene. So a couple other things that are useful to know. So resizing is just grabbing the handles, and it keeps the aspect ratio. You can also hold down the Alt key or the Option key on Mac. And if I hold the Alt key down and click on one of these controls, instead of resizing, it does a crop. It's cutting that down to size. So I can choose to maybe make this, more of a square image and bring it in a little tighter and just pop it in the corner someplace. So this would be something that you would do if you were creating a scene where you wanted to have a video overlay and maybe have something else going on in the background. It makes it very easy to do this. I can also right click, and you'll see that there is a number of different options in here for grouping things, renaming things, setting colors, and so on. There's also transform. And one of the things that you can do with transform is you can reset. And that's a great way to get you back to your starting point if you've resized and moved things and cropped things and went, oh shoot, I really wish I could start over again. That's how you can do that. The other thing that's important is down here in the scene area, there's a couple of different icons. The eyeball simply means this source is visible or not. And the padlock, if that's clicked on and then it becomes bright white, that makes it so that the source is no longer editable. So being able to resize it and move it around gets locked out. So you can't do it by accident. So we're going to do that here. I'm going to click on that lock, and now I can no longer drag this around. And the resizing options are gone. If I click on, it's still there. I haven't lost anything. I'm just hiding it. And that becomes important later on. So now that we have a camera, so this would be kind of our typical webcam view if we were inside of Teams. And what we want to do now is create that title bar so that we can kind of tell what's going on. The first thing that we're going to do then is we're going to add a color source. And I'm just going to call it the background and hit OK. Now the color, I can select, and I'm just going to pick black. And there we go. By default, any new source that you add to a scene is going to be put on top of whatever sources are already there. So the new background we've added is sitting right on top of our camera and hides it completely. So the simple thing for us to do, we could grab this handle up here and drag it, but of course that's going to make it narrower as well as shorter. And we don't really want to resize it like that. What we want to do instead is hold our Alt key down and drag this down so that we can crop it. And we can crop it to maybe about that high. And once we have it where we want it, we can lock it so that we can't do it by accident. Now, something I like to do with the background is I like to make it translucent. I don't like having just a solid bar back there where you can't see my hands moving through it or anything like that. So this is where we get to play with filters. With the background highlighted, click on the filters button, and then under the filters list, we hit plus, and we're going to add color correction. Now you can see there's a lot of different filters in here. I will probably have more here than what you see because I've added a few plugins and those add additional filters. We're only going to use the ones that are built in, so don't worry about that. And these all do different things, add different features. I won't go into many of those today because we're not going to need them for this. I want to keep this simple and fairly short. But we do want color correction because it has a particular feature we need. So I'm going to hit OK. And there's our color correction settings, and we can control the contrast and gamma and brightness and saturation and so on. But most importantly, what we want to do is we want to play around with opacity. And opacity is what allows us to change how transparent this is. So I'm going to slide this thing, and you can already see going on down here that we can start to see my background coming through. Now exactly how much is kind of up to you. I'm going to set it to about 85.85, and I can just type that in and hit OK. And there we have our semi-transparent background. So the next thing we want to do is just add some text. So we're going to do that by hitting plus again. And down here we have a source called text GDI plus. So we're going to add text. I'm going to call this name. And I'm going to put in Ken Ross. Now I can do a bunch of different things here. You can see that we can control the font. We can control the color. There's a lot of different settings in here that you can play around with. We're going to keep it simple. I'm going to change the color to kind of a cyan because I think that looks cool. And that's about it. So then I can just click on this and drag it down so that it's over top of our area here and get it kind of roughly where I want it. So we can see that I can move around and I can see my text, and the background is translucent, so that works out quite well. And why did I put it over here? Why not click on it and drag it over and set things up over on the edge here? Well, the reason for that has to do with how Teams works, and that's not exclusive to Teams, but you may have noticed when you're in a Teams meeting, if you have multiple cameras turned on, if multiple people have turned their cameras on, Teams makes some adjustments to try and fit as many on the screen as possible. And what it does is it focuses on trying to keep you visible, and it'll crop in from the edges to gradually make your video feed narrower so that it can fit more stuff on the screen. And you can particularly see this happen when you're doing a screen share. If you're sharing your desktop and your camera is up in the corner, it's usually quite narrow. So with that in mind, try and keep any important information that you want to share in your lower thirds, keep that towards the center so that there's less chance of it being cut off. If you have some decorative fun things, you want to put those towards the edges, by all means. Be as creative as you want, but try and keep things centered. Now this can be a little tricky to visualize, and so I've created a little graphic overlay that makes it easy to kind of get things aligned. And I'll leave a link to that graphic in the notes below so that you can download it if you want to use it. All I have to do for that is on my computers, I'm going to go ahead and add my, let's see here, I'm going to add an image. Now an image can be any kind of graphic. It could be a PNG, JPEG, TIFF, whatever graphic file you have. Typically, if you want it to be transparent, it's going to be a PNG file. So I'm going to select image. I'm going to call it alignment overlay. And then I'm going to take a look around to see where it is. And I happen to know that I have one saved over in my OBS assets. And there you go. Now it's automatically sized for a 1920 by 1080 screen, a regular screen resolution. And it has these handy dandy lines. And of course, it's put it at the very top of the stack. And so what you might want to do is just either use these down arrows to knock it down to here. You can also drag things around within the scene if you want to rearrange them. I like to put this just above the camera underneath my background and then lock it. And so now I can see kind of exactly what I want to do alignment wise. I can see where center is. I can see where these are kind of the safe zones. Anything outside of that is more likely to be cropped. There's also space underneath this. You can kind of see some spacing below the main this main area because teams will also crop up a little bit. And so again, that's kind of your safety. If you keep your content within these boxes, you should be good. So now that I've got that there, I can click on my name again and drag that over so that it's more centered. Then let's go ahead and add another text, and we'll call this title. And same thing as before. I will monkey, and I'm going to pick a different font. Yes, that's a font inspired by Guardians of the Galaxy. You might not have that font. That's okay. I'm going to pick a color. And then I'm just going to resize it and get that into position. Now, something that you can do with things too, of course, as I'm resizing, if I grab these handles and just move them, it sizes proportionally, so it keeps the aspect ratio. But the other thing you can do is hold down Shift. And if I hold Shift down, then it doesn't resize it proportionally. It sizes in that one orientation, so I can make my title here a little narrower by scrunching up the text a bit. But I think it actually looks a little better like that. So there we have our title. And once you've got something aligned and located where you want it, go ahead and hit the lock button so you don't accidentally move those around. Now, something else that I like to have is a little separator here between stuff I have on the left and stuff on the right. That's just my preference. You may not want to do that, but let me show you how you do it just in case. So I'm going to add another color source, just like we did for our little band across the bottom. And I'm going to call this separator. And I think for color, today is purple day. So there we go. Now it's huge. We know we could resize it, but we can also just put in a size that we like. So I might just put in 4 wide and maybe 120 high. And so then it's just this little guy up here. And I can drag it down, get it where I want it. Now if I want to change it some more, of course I could try and grab the handles and resize it, but I can also just go back to its properties. If I move this out of the way, I could say, okay, maybe I want it a little taller. You can see that it's doing it in real time. It's 30, there's 35, and that's just about perfect. So now I've got that bar there. So what I like to do for Teams is to make this a point of engagement, which means that it not only has my name and my title, and that might just be the title of the role that I'm in for this particular project. It might not be my official title, but I'd also like to be able to share a little bit of information about where I'm at and, maybe some interests so that it's a little bit more engaging with my customers. One of the things, especially with us dealing with customers all over the world and team members all over the world, is where are you? What's your time zone? How often does that come up in conversation? So those are two of the things that I like to make sure that I have on my lower thirds before I do anything else more decorative. So let's look at how we could do that. Now the location is easy. We'll just add another text box for that. The other thing is once you've been dragging things around and resizing it so it's selected on this screen, you can fine tune it with the arrow keys. So if I just press my up and down arrow keys, left and right arrow keys, I can just nudge this around and get it lined up exactly how I want. That'll get that in place. And again, as soon as I get it where I want it, I lock it so I can't hit these things by accident. Now that comes the tricky one, which is time. There's nothing here that will give me the time. But there are lots of ways of getting the time. The simplest way is to use a free website that can generate a time display for you in different formats, different time zones, lots of different options. And there's several of these kind of websites around. We're going to use one that I've used a few times now for these projects, and I'll share the link for that site down below. It's called free.time and date. So it's in the name. So what we do is we drop in as a source a browser, and I'm going to call it local time. Now the browser literally can point to any website anywhere. It can also point to a local file. Now, if you know HTML and CSS and maybe some JavaScript, you could create all kinds of amazing things just saved in a local file and then referenced as this source so that it drops into your scene. Your imagination is pretty much the limit. But there's also lots of websites that have things that you can get for free that are web-based that you could either save to a local file or reference the website itself directly. So in my case, I have a URL for the clock that I've set up previously. And you can see that this has a bunch of parameters set up on it. It's just how their website works. So there's the free timeanddate.com. It's the clock. It's got a particular ID set up because of how I've configured it. And framing and border and width and all those kinds of things. So it's up to you how you do it. I'm not going to take you through their website to do this. I'm just going to show you how this works here. So I'm just going to hit OK. And now we see that we have this website set up. Now it's transparent, because that's how I have it set up. They have options to give it a background and things if that's what you wanted to have. And we're going to want to resize it and stuff. And by default, this is in a 800 by 600 rectangle. So the first thing I'm going to do is hold my Alt key down and click on these controls so I can crop it, because I don't need it to be anywhere near that big. Now, when you're doing this, you don't want to crop it in too tight because this text is variable. As the time changes, these values will change, and that'll change the width of those characters. So give it enough room that the whole thing will be displayed. If it was only displaying 9 a.m. right now, and I cropped it in enough to just see the 9, then obviously I'm going to miss out the 1 when it gets to 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. So just give it a little bit of room. And once you have things cropped where you want them, then it's just like before. We just bring it in, drop it down where we might want to have it. I can resize it, so I can bring it in here. Again, I'm using the arrow keys to just nudge it around. And maybe I want to resize it just a little bit. So I can still, even though it's cropped, I can still resize it. If you want to change the color of the clock, make sure that the clock is selected. Go to Filters. Click Add. Let's go to Color Correction. And the thing that we want here is Color Multiply. So we're going to select the color. And maybe we just want to tone it down a little bit. We can drag this down. Hit OK. See how it's taken effect, made it more gray. Really, what any color that you want to change it to, you can absolutely do that. If you don't like the colors here, maybe you've got a graphic or a logo on the screen, you can use Pick Screen Color. And then wherever your mouse moves, it will sample that color. Like if I move over to my monkey, then I can select that. And now I know that I have an exact match. Again, we want to make sure we lock that. And there we go. I don't really need the alignment overlay anymore, so I can click on the eyeball to get rid of that. And now we can see what our finished lowers third looks like. Now, something that's usually a good idea to set up is a way to hide this. Obviously we could hide each individual item, but that's kind of time consuming. What if we want to be able to show this in the beginning of a conversation, and maybe when we're doing a presentation, we want to hide it so that it's not distracting for anybody. So the way to do that is for us to go in and select all of these sources. And I'm just clicking on the first one and then holding Shift and clicking on the last one. And then right click anywhere in there and tell it that we want to create a group. So group selected items. And then we'll just give it a name, lower thirds. So now that whole group is selected. And I can collapse and expand it. So if you have a lot of different things in your scene, this is a nice way to be able to take things that are related to one another, group them, and then be able to collapse that so it's less distracting while you're working on it. The other thing this is handy for is that you can assign a filter to a group. So if you were to assign the filter to the group, and then everything inside of that is affected. So there's my lower thirds group. So we can click on the eyeball to hide and show the bar, but it's a little abrupt. It just I don't know. This is called the fancy cam. This should be a little fancier. So what we can do is we can right click, make sure our lower thirds is selected, right click on it, and we have these two options, show transition and hide transition. And so what these mean is that these are transitions, these are animations that will be applied when something is shown or hidden, right? So it's shown when the eyeball is lit up, and it's hidden when the eyeball is grayed out. So when we show it, let's say we want to slide. And I'm going to say that I want to slide up. And we can slide left, right, however you want to do it. I kind of like up for this, so I can preview it. You can see that this is going to slide up. Likewise, I'm going to go for the hide, select slide, and tell it that I want to slide down. So now when I click on the eyeball, when I hide it, it just dips down, and when I show it, it comes back up. So it looks much better, much fancier. Now, this is all well and good, but if you're in a meeting, it's going to be kind of a pain to have to go and look over wherever you've got OBS running, and then be able to find that eyeball and hit that, and that might be a little bit more troublesome than what you want. So how can we make that easier? OBS supports defining hotkeys for just about anything going on inside of OBS. That includes being able to show and hide different scenes, switching between scenes, and showing and hiding your sources, and even the filters within those sources. So it's really quite powerful. Huh? So you can imagine that you could set up hotkeys to let you move between different cameras. So while you're chatting with somebody, if you wanted to quickly do something with a different effect, you could have a hotkey that lets you go control numpad 1 to go to camera 1, to control numpad 2 to go to camera 2, and so on. Makes it pretty neat, and you can picking keys that you could find easily without having to look down at your keyboard all the time. Makes it pretty fun. So how do we do that? Well, we just go into settings. So I'm going to, that's over here on the right hand side. Just show you where that's at. There's our settings. So I'm just going to click on settings, and then we go down to hotkeys. And hotkeys, of course, is going to show you all kinds of different functions that are built into OBS itself, being able to start recording and stop recording and all this other stuff. But if you scroll down, then you start to see the scenes. So there's our scene called camera, and there's our scene called fancy cam. And so you can set up a hotkey to switch to the scene itself. What we want to do is look inside of it. So here's all of the different sources inside of the fancy cam scene. And you can see that a lot of these are paired. When I click on one, I get them both. And the reason that these are paired is because it knows that what you're likely doing here is a toggle, hiding and showing. So rather than have to have one key to show and another key to hide, it sets it up so that I can define one key, and if I press the key once, I get it to show. If I press it again, I get it to hide. It just toggles back and forth. So all you have to do to make that happen is I'm going to click into the lower thirds, and you can tell that it's even giving us a tooltip to describe just what I told you. So we're going to click here inside of our lower thirds. I'm going to just hold down my control key, and as soon as I do, you see that shows up, and I'm going to press the minus key on my numeric keypad. Instead, I have control minus as my toggle. Now make sure when you're defining these hotkeys that you define them in both spots. If you don't do that, it'll seem to ignore you. It just won't work. So I've got control num minus defined for show. I need to hold control and minus on the hide so that those are paired up now. Now that that's done, I can move my mouse out of the way so that that's not really present. I can find my control and my minus key on my keyboard pretty easily, and I can just press those, and I can hide and show my fancy bar. The last thing I need to show you is how to use OBS with Teams. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Teams has to be running. Not only does Teams need to be running, but you have to turn on the OBS virtual webcam. Now, the way you do that is just with the Start Virtual Webcam down here in the bottom right corner. Once that's on, an OBS virtual webcam will show up inside of really any application that's looking for a webcam. So inside of Teams, we'll need to go into the device settings for your meeting in order to be able to tell it which camera source to use. The same place where you would set your microphone up and your headphones, down at the very bottom of the screen, there is a drop down that lets you pick which camera. So you could be able to pick your normal webcam, and you'll be able to pick the OBS virtual camera as well. Once that's done, you can turn on the camera option inside of Teams, and you should see the virtual camera coming from OBS. OBS can be minimized at that point. You don't have to keep looking at it. And of course, if you have those hotkeys set up, you'll be able to interact with it, turn on your lower thirds whenever you want, and just have a great time with an enhanced Teams experience. So, pretty easy stuff. There's a ton more that you can do in here. Let me know in the comments if there's particular things that you'd like to see. And if you have any questions about what we've done in here so far. Hope you've enjoyed it. Like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.